Welcome to Kellogg's Global Politics. I'm Anita, and I'm here with my co-host Ryan.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Today's episode follows up on our previous two episodes with a focus on Iran. Where are we 1 month into this war? When and how is it likely to end? We also wonder about the U.S.'s strategic plans for this war. And does regime survival in Iran mean that it may be losing battles, but ultimately winning the war?
So, you glad you didn't place that bet on Polymarket?
Sure. It was a crazy bet to take.
Yeah, and just for listeners' benefit, so we had discussed at the end of the last episode, I think the Polymarket had the chance of the Iranian regime falling at the end of March at like 20%. And you very confidently said, yeah, I'll take that.
I don't think I said it was...
It was good value for money is what you're saying.
Yeah. But, yeah, obviously that hasn't happened.
Yeah, that hasn't happened, but...
You're also wrong.
I was also wrong. The taco trade did not quite pan out. I was trying to think of like the analogy.
What do you mean it didn't quite pan out? It didn't pan out at all.
No, because it seemed like it was going to pan out. And I think if Trump actually had control over the situation and could pull out, he would have tacoed like 2 weeks ago.
What do you mean he doesn't have control over the situation?
That the economic leverage that we'll talk about that Iran's been able to establish has now allowed him that he can't have a painless pulling out of the region. Or not as painless as he was probably envisioning at the time. So that's prevented him from tacoing. Even though every single action that he's done is a typical taco thing, but it's not. It has increasingly less and less power in the marketplace, I think is what we've seen over time. That was a long way of saying I was also wrong that the taco trade has not worked out and that this seems to be going well beyond a month, which really was how it was framed at the beginning first it was framed as a couple days and then it was expanded to 4 weeks and it looks like it's going to extend well beyond that. Well,
technically they said 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, so they have 2 weeks left.
Yeah.
Okay. Who knows? Maybe we'll wrap up by then. It's probably better for the world if it did wrap up by then.
Yeah, it would. But does it wrap up with us achieving our objectives is the big question.
Yeah, and that's what we'll discuss. Okay, so I think it's probably worthwhile just to give an overview of where we're at a month in. And I'm going to start off with, and this is all coming from a U.S. perspective as we normally talk about and the objectives of U.S. foreign policy. So I'm starting off with the good news, which has definitely been emphasized over and over in the daily briefings by the White House and the Defense Department on the status of the military campaign. So U.S. and Israel, since the campaign began on February 28th, have struck 15,000 targets. And what they've achieved essentially is that both the Iranian drone and missile launches are down about 90% since the start of the war. And Iranian naval forces and air force have largely been neutralized. And as a result of that, U.S.-Israeli forces appear to have gained near complete air superiority and have actually switched over to more conventional ordnance and non-stealth aircraft to carry out its bombing runs. So that being said, the caveats are Iran has still demonstrated the ability to conduct both ballistic missile launches and drone strikes. The Washington Post reported this week that the estimates that nearly a third of Iranian ballistic missiles still remain. This is despite, again, 15,000 targets being struck, including the underground bunkers in which a lot of these missiles lie in. The other component is the fact that this is very much asymmetric warfare. So even though the availability of making drone launches as well as speedboats have allowed Iran the ability to control the Straits of Hormuz, which have become the central point of the war and really reflects Iran's ability to have leverage over the global economy. But we'll get into more details on that. The Gulf states have continued to be targeted as they were at the beginning of the campaign. I guess on the positive side, that the interception rates of these drone attacks and ballistic missiles have been around 80 to 90%, which have increasingly targeted energy facilities within those countries. But that 80 to 90%, again, from a tactical perspective, is impressive because it matches what Ukraine is able to do.
I would think that they would be able to do better than Ukraine.
Ukraine's had a lot of experience, though. And this includes mostly the vast majority of the sorties by Iran are drones. And that's not something that the West, the U.S. and Israel have a lot of experience in it, but Ukraine does. So if you're intercepting like drones at the rate that Ukraine does, that means you're doing pretty well.
Okay.
That being said, so the interceptor stockpiles are running low for sure. And definitely it's been reported in cases like Israel that they're being rationed. So if it looks like the missile's not going to hit a strategic target, they'll let it go. And then seeing some of the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, who actually reached a deal with Ukraine to bring its drone interception capabilities and consulting to
I always wonder
these
how
countries.
Ukraine has excess capacity.
Yeah, it's surprising that they do, but I actually watched a really cool video this morning from a Ukrainian company and kind of interceptors that they're using. So it's like $1,000 little drone. And the company's been around maybe like 9 months, but they're able to produce thousands of these. They can train a person as long as they have some drone experience to fly it within like a couple days. But yeah, I guess they're churning it out and it represents a valuable revenue source. I'm sure you can charge the Gulf states and the Saudis whatever you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, unlike probably the current administration, which has been, I think, dismissed the offers by Zelensky in Ukraine to help with the situation, the Gulf states are much more open-minded around taking Ukrainian advice and expertise, which is positive. The other area of, again, where Israel and the U.S. administration have highlighted is the continued ability to target top Iranian leadership. And I think what we've seen over the last month is continued success. I think last episode we had talked about Ali Larijani, who was seen as a key member of the Inner Circle, who's actually part of the original negotiations between Kushner and Witkoff. He was targeted and killed by Israel. There's also been a number of other individuals on the defense state that have been targeted and killed at will. That also being said, so I think probably 2 weeks into the campaign after the death at the beginning of Khamenei, Ali Khamenei, the 86-year-old supreme leader of Iran, the announcement that his son was appointed, which I think we had talked about originally, is unlikely because at least from a theocratic point of view, he was not favored by like the Council of Experts and the theocratic leadership. But as we'll discuss later, the IRGC is in full control of the country. So it's really the theocratic leadership seems like they've been fully sidelined and that it's basically a military junta that's running the country. Khamenei, the son, is... Yeah.
So if it's a military junta running the country, in some sense, isn't that regime change?
Yeah. Well... You could certainly frame it that way. I mean, they still have the symbolic head of state, which I was going to mention. So the son has not been, there's no proof that he's alive at all. The rumors are that he's either in a coma or in a hospital in Moscow or dead already. So it's also like, well, when we talk about the negotiations with the U.S. that are supposedly ongoing, who is the U.S. negotiating with?
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's pretty nebulous at this point. If there is a central figure in control or represents the regime. And I think that's a real question at this point.
I just think there is
So you think
a
that, oh, wait a second, you're trying to win your bet.
there is a case
Does this
to
count
be
as
made
regime change?
that a military
No,
junta
because
is
the
regime
Constitution didn't change. There's still a theocratic head of government. It's only, I think it's
Ostensibly,
only,
I mean,
only if somebody emerges within the IRGC that in the agreement that it results. Yeah, no, I don't think this counts as regime. One, polymarket's the determination of this. And the chance of regime change currently for the end of March, it being March 28th currently, is like 1%. So I do not think they interpret this as a regime change.
but I think that you can make a case for it being a regime change.
Well, take it up with polymarket because that's
Right.
that's who we're judging on what a regime change is.
Well, whether I'm right or not, I think
I like how you're trying to win off of
if it's become a military junta, that's a different government.
that was the definition that the Economist applied.
Well,
it's probably up for debate on nobody really fully knows, but this is what's being gleaned from internal sources.
Seems likely.
Yeah, I think so too, but
So that's regime change.
does not count. Nice try though. So yeah, I think that brings us into the idea of who is running Iran currently. And like I alluded to, this article that The Economist put out on March 25th, all signs really point to the IRGC, which is a 190,000 strong paramilitary force that seems to have stepped into the void. And if it is, then it really would represent a shift from more theocratic control to a government that's more aligned with like an Algeria and Egypt or Pakistan.
The Economist thinks that there's regime change.
Yeah, we're defining this by polymarket.
Okay, but The Economist thinks there has been.
So the IRGC took several actions. I think this really points to the difficulty of what remaining hope there is around true regime change in the sense of what Israel or the U.S. had in mind at the beginning of the war, which was a government that was favorable to the United States and Israel in place.
Yeah, but we talked about regime change. That was never the likeliest.
Yeah, but that was framed as the goal at the beginning of it.
You can't do that, especially without boots on the ground. But even with boots on the ground, it would be really hard to dictate the type of government that succeeds the one you took out.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing against that.
I'm just saying that.
Of course, it was probably always unrealistic. And that's why we were, speculating on, well, if you're actually doing this, maybe Mossad and the CIA, just like anytime that this succeeded, like in the 50s and 60s, you have to have a force on the ground. You have to have armed a significant part of the population, or you have had an agreement with one of these IRGC generals and his divisions that will break away and support whatever group.
It's true.
And that's something the Economist actually highlighted, that there is different ideological beliefs within the IRGC, that there's actual split between hardcore radicals within the group and more moderates. But it's not clear. There's no evidence at this stage that anything is being set up or would be working towards that direction. Everything and there's very little reporting. Again, internet has been completely down within Iran since the start of the conflict. I don't think Starlink, that there's been any successful dissemination of that or communication. So you're seeing just a consistent crackdown internally of any potential resistance within the regime. So it seems more hardline than it was previously and completely on a war footing. I thought the other interesting that this article pointed out was that even though I swear it didn't seem like they learned anything from the 12-Day War, but the IRGC did make note of the targeting of leadership, obviously not the top leadership, but they decentralized their operations considerably and actually split into 31 different sub-districts. And then each sub-district within the country operates autonomously, so that if communication is lost with central command in Tehran, that they have the ammunition, they have the ability to still carry out strikes independently from the center. I think even more disturbingly is that the IRGC's internal security forces, the Basaj, were split into tens of thousands of small cells. So it's like they're already positioning themselves for a insurgency campaign, effectively, which is something I was a little impressed by, I think both these actions, just because everything that Iran has telegraphed prior to this was not learning any lessons, being completely compromised, telegraphing nothing but weakness. But for a nation state that has a traditional army to then pivot to preparation for more an insurgency type campaign, really says that they learned like the lessons of Iraq and everything that's been successful. With the Taliban, that makes sense because they were never a centralized state in the first place. It makes sense that they would operate as insurgents and have that ability down. But for them to operationalize and turn into these cells and then embed themselves within civilian infrastructure means that even though Israel, because that's a lot of these 15,000 strikes were against internal security forces. But if they're so spread out and diffused and decentralized, it really points to, there's no way that you can do this without ground forces, and certainly not without, if you weren't prepping months beforehand with a proxy force or some sort of breakout.
Seems like they've made it where even boots on the ground would find themselves in a pretty intractable situation. If you're having to go after 31 groups, essentially acting autonomously, that's a pretty big order, let alone the infrastructure, the cells in the infrastructure. So, it would make a ground invasion very, very painful and not easily extractable.
Yeah, it seems that way. It goes back to what the objectives are going forward. But they've definitely, and maybe none of this should come as a surprise. Iran has probably been, obviously has been preparing for this for 47 years. Mm-hmm. Their last major engagement was like the Iran-Iraq war against a conventional army. I'm not learned enough to know the lessons that they made, and those may be so outdated anyway. But strategically, it's been interesting, seeing that they had prepared this pivot, and then how the IRGC has operated both from a propaganda standpoint and from their ability to leverage, even it, because again, we talked about the interception rate. It only takes 10%, or even only takes 1%. It only takes one drone getting through, striking a major oil facility or LNG facility, and that's enough. Or a tanker, which apparently I think they've struck 17 different shipping tankers during the course of the war, that's enough to cripple the entire global economy. So it's a much lower standard. Tactically, the U.S. and Israel can be brilliant. Like stunningly brilliant. But all Iran has to do is occasionally get one through every so often and survive.
Right.
So much, much lower bar.
Right. That's the whole principle of asymmetrical warfare, really, is that, as I said up front, you can lose all these battles because you obviously don't have the firepower that is being thrown against you. But survival itself is a win. And being able to inflict pain. I think what's really interesting that this war shows is that Access goes on a lot about bringing war back into the war colleges and seemingly meaning military specifically hard power, but wars are now fought economically, like using that. They're inextricably linked. And Iran is definitely using these smaller pinpricks that it can enact to disrupt the economy and create pain that way.
Yeah. And it's only recently that nations were far weaker states have had that power. And it really points to what a game changer autonomous vehicles and these drones are. And the fact that, Iran was at the cutting edge of these drone technologies. The proof of that is that the U.S. copied this design to put out its own similar drone, which has flown through, which is a little embarrassing that we weren't we're not at the edge of this. And then the Ukrainians are by far the experts on defense against these, and we've pushed them away. So, but yeah, it's what's been stunning is I think in my mind, my mental model was like, well, Iran's like Iraq was like maybe in 1990. It's an established nation state with a regular conventional army and force. And the U.S. going up against the conventional army and force beyond like China, it's going to be just a slaughterhouse. It's right. Just, if you straight up fight the United States, you're going to lose. But yeah, if Iran is then able to, make this pivot, even though as an established nation states, to an insurgency, which I always think of more as like, well, once the nation is defeated, then you have to deal with an insurgency. Not that the force can immediately pivot and fight more like an insurgency rather than a conventional nation state.
That seems like a modern adaptation for sure.
Yeah. So I think that's I think the other, I don't know if you picked up, this will be a little bit of a sidetrack, but still related. Have you come across any of the propaganda being put out on social media by Iran?
I haven't been on social media in such a long time, so no.
That's probably good.
I used to do it regularly, and then I got out of the habit of it. So now I'm here for on.
So I've just been monitoring it mostly for updates on energy markets and things. But X being the cesspool that it is, will just see anything. But so Iran has been creating, again, leveraging AI, been putting out pretty effective, targeted for Western audiences. Because again, Iran has no internet access. This is strictly targeted. But the interesting thing the New York Times put out is that it's being amplified by both Russia and China, which is, of course, famous for its digital army of meme warriors and message posters and trolls that put out things. So they've been amplifying the message that essentially is coming directly from the IRGC as part of this cyber warfare. And they put out a series, probably some of the most effective videos are actually, like the Lego movie, that animation style. They've been putting out a series of Lego style, and it sounds ridiculous, but you have to see it, Lego style propaganda videos that are surprisingly effective. Just judging by looking at, again, the comments and the people, how it's moving up within the algorithm, like on X and other sources.
So, what is the central message in these videos?
Yeah, so it does have a key central message, which they key in it. So the number one thing is always like Trump being tied to Epstein. Trump is a pedophile. Trump is waging this war because of the cover-up for the release of the Epstein files. The other pivot is, of course, anti-Semitism. Right. U.S. is a puppet of Israel, who in turn is a puppet of Satan. That's usually always featured within these videos. And that the U.S. is being humiliated on the battlefield as well, which, of course, we talked about the reality of it, not true. But they emphasize the perception, I think, and you see that reflected definitely on online circles, is that Iran is a lot more effective. Just the fact that it's able to get off drones, that it has had the impact on the global economy and the Straits of Hormuz. So all of that is emphasized. And then there's like shadows of the future too. So like the last videos have come out are showing, again, this is all Lego, guys, but it's showing like U.S. Marines in Lego form dying on Karg Island, which of course is being theorized as where the U.S. will likely intervene in the coming days or weeks.
Interesting. I mean, so do you think this actually has any penetration into American society?
I think, well, given the fact that this war is enormously unpopular, because I think that's the other thing, unlike every previous war, especially recently, the ones that we've lived through, Afghanistan and Iraq, which had nearly 80-90% support at the beginning of these wars. This is enormously unpopular. There's maybe 60% that are against the war. So I think it does resonate. I think what's impressive is normally foreign propaganda is so tone deaf, like they don't understand the culture. But this Lego video, and you should watch it. I know I'm like encouraging people to watch Iranian propaganda, but I think it is interesting just from an intellectual point. I mean, it featured, I thought, a pretty good rap tune with it, and then the animation is excellent. I mean, it's well done. If it's called AI slop, I'd say it's very well done. AI slop is.
I guess I will have to look at it.
Yeah, it's worth seeing. So I would say, yeah, it probably is effective. I don't know if it changes people's minds, but it certainly reinforces people that are against the war.
Right.
They'll see this, and this will reinforce it, and they'll share it, and maybe not even know that it's. I mean, it's pretty obvious it comes from Iran. It's Iranian propaganda. It's not that subtle.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. That their propaganda could be effective. It just seems like normally you'd be like, oh, the others. I guess that is why you have propaganda wars as part of any war. But I guess in my head, that always seems so strange that anybody would take a foreign country's propaganda and take it to heart.
Yeah, I think it's understanding the culture well enough and touching on the points. I mean, there's another one, and there's some of it specifically is targeting Trump's ego as well. I mean, they're all targeting Trump's ego, but there's one where the whole thing is like calling him a loser and just focusing on what a loser he is. But even like the Lego, this attention to detail, the Lego guy actually of Trump has like a bruised hand at one point, because there's been a lot of emphasis on the strange bruises that Trump has like on his hand. So it's just this focus on his physical and on his ego. And it's for a foreign government to produce that and have like enough insight into Western media, which of course is out there, but gosh, the garbage that was put out historically by like a China or the Soviet Union is never effective. It's always so pathetic and poorly done.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking historically.
But this is so, I don't know if this means like this is a new age of propaganda that's enabled by foreign governments. I don't know, but I was fairly impressed by it. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. And another aspect of adapting to modern warfare, like I said, historically, people have always used propaganda, but from what you say, it seems, I mean, one, you have different outlets. You're not just dropping pamphlets, right? Which is what countries have had to do in the past. And so that you can have more penetration through social media.
And I think again, you're seeing the emergence of this advanced AI developed by the West but then is able to be used by anybody to create these enormously, and of course this is Lego style, but there's plenty of other ones, including I saw a pretty disturbing one that had like Trump being tortured by an IRGC interrogator. I don't think as effective. Even people that dislike Trump, I don't think that's going to resonate with seeing a foreign and that sort of sense. But yeah, I mean, I think it's this AI technology allows you to create very targeted, very specific, depending on the user, realistic looking propaganda as well. For no cost. That's the other thing. No cost and no real skill needed.
Right.
Maybe some editing skills, but that's it. I think that obviously the biggest focus and where Iran's entire strategy at this point is around the targeting of the global economy. So I wanted to spend a little time just going through what has been the impact thus far on the economy. So Iran has successfully shut down the movement of energy exports via the Strait of Hormuz. I think their exports get through, obviously. So those are reaching markets, but that represents a relatively small amount. They weren't exporting that much oil.
Can't wait till we talk more about their exports, because I don't understand why we no longer have sanctions on Iranian oil.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to, I will say that the administration has done as much as they possibly could in a very rapid fashion to ease the impact on energy markets as much as possible, given the size of the impact, which is the Straits of Hormuz. Is, I'm sure everybody that's listening to this is familiar. It's a very long recognized choke point. Every military strategist, every IR scholar, everybody knew this for 50 years, how critical this junction point was. But it has 20 million barrels of oil a day that used to pass through it, which represents 20% of global oil production. In order to counter this, so the U.S., together with the IEA, have done extraordinary measures and have released the largest ever release of strategic petroleum reserves worldwide of about 400 million barrels. The Saudis, in turn, have increased oil shipments via a pipeline that goes to the opposite coast, to the Red Sea. So effectively, between these two measures have the impact to just a loss of 10 million barrels per day, or about 10% of global demand.
Well, how long will they be able to continue to release petroleum reserves?
That depends per country. That being said, if you recall from our discussions during the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, so the U.S. released a significant portion of its reserves during that time, drew down, I think, over 50% of the reserves, of which the Trump administration did not take advantage of the low oil prices last year to refill those. So we're already at a relatively low point from where we're at. The real winner in this, and who looks like a strategic genius, maybe on multiple fronts, is China. So China has been buying enormous amounts, building enormous stockpile. All of this is not transparent on the Chinese. Nobody really knows exactly how much.
But I've heard
reserves.
this before, right?
Yeah.
That they're very conscious of their vulnerabilities, and one of their vulnerabilities is energy products. And they must stockpile agricultural products too, because that's the other vulnerability they see in any conflict.
Yeah. So they've enormously increased their strategic reserves over time. So they're seen as being pretty well positioned. Japan and Korea are relatively well positioned. It's really Southeast Asia is really feeling the brunt of this. It's including places like Pakistan and Bangladesh. A lot of these countries are already starting pretty severe rationing campaigns, particularly around diesel, which is seen based on the content of the crude that is being exported from the Middle East, that its production is likely to be the most heavily impacted. I think the other area that you've seen countries do, and I think part of this was Russia-Ukraine was certainly a similar impact, a larger impact in a lot of ways in terms of prices, but countries are turning towards coal. So a lot of these countries, and obviously China, India, have huge coal reserves. I say because of commitments around climate change, they're trying to draw down those plants. But a lot of these were just mothballed so that they could be spun up on relatively short notice. And that's what you're seeing is those impacted from lack of either fuel oil or natural gas deliveries are now turning those coal plants back on and seeing those as a way to buffer some of the impact. I think, on that pricing, I thought one of the interesting things that was posted by Javier Baez, who's one of the probably leading guy on X/Twitter in the energy space. But he pointed out rightly, we're still well short of the peaks that we saw in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Brent, for instance, this morning was 107. It peaked at 139 in 2022. Natural gas for the EU I think in particular, so I didn't realize it had gotten up to like 339. This is per megawatt hour. Right now it's at 55. So even Europe, who seem like they would be the most impacted on the gas side, because one, obviously they've quit Russian gas, but then two, they become increasingly dependent on US LNG, which is good from a security standpoint, but they were also very dependent on Qatar. And Qatar's facilities were heavily damaged over the last month to the point where Qatar Energy announced that they would be down 15 to 20% of their LNG capacity for the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So very significant damage to that infrastructure. So there's been long-term damage being done to these infrastructure sites. And that's something I thought The Economist did a good job of pointing out, that even if this were to end tomorrow, that the effects on the global economy and on price would linger for years, potentially. Yeah. But I did want to pivot back to your point. And did you want to talk on the sanction relief that was also part of U.S. strategy to bring additional energy reserves to the market?
Well, I think we announced that we were lifting sanctions on Russia first.
Right.
Which, on one hand, didn't surprise me to an extreme degree, but is disappointing, right? Because those sanctions are important to, at least to some extent, to making it, basically the sanctions make it hard for these companies, make it hard for these countries to have money for their economies, thus oiling their war machine. So the whole idea of these type of sanctions is to decrease capacity to wage a war. And all of a sudden you're giving them relief, which is why it's so crazy, the lifting sanctions on Iranian oil, because you want to decrease the capabilities of the country you're fighting against. So I just can't even fathom why you would. I mean, I understand why he is reducing it, because he's concerned about oil prices.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then you're giving more money to the Iranian economy to feed into their war machine.
Yep. Yeah. You remember how much Republicans went after Obama for the pallets of cash that Obama gave to Iran? Yeah, this windfall that Iran got because of this action is like 10 times. 10 or more times that amount. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's so funny how they went crazy over that and can now make decisions that far surpass it. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just don't know. I'm not a historian, but I don't know of any conflict where the other side increased the capability of the country that they're fighting against.
That's usually not done. I mean, I don't know because you studied World War I a lot, and I was always surprised like what trade was still happening during the world wars for like critical supplies and things along those lines. I mean, I guess it falls. I mean, not that you're. I mean, get it, because you want to make sure that those oil flows reach global markets, because that's the only thing that's important, is that the oil flows to the market, that it reaches the market.
But who's the money going to? Well,
okay. So to be fair, this is where like Treasury Secretary Bessent says, well, that money's going to be, because it has to, however channels it passes through, that the U.S. will have some sort of leverage or intervene, that it won't go back to the Iranian regime.
It makes no sense. It's going back.
It for sure is going back.
No, what you had during World War I is countries continue to trade despite the war.
Yeah.
But eventually they curtailed it, right? So they may have traded, I forget, Britain and Germany were still trading steel for a couple years. But then the British were able to enact
when like the supply chains can adapt and you can get other sources for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's very different than beginning a war by not allowing your companies to buy any of those products or having another country have access to those products. And then suddenly in the middle of war, release those and then giving them money or resources.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy. But again, this administration has done every single thing without even thinking through things like that in order to try to ease the economic impact on it.
I get it, but at the same time, I really have trouble wrapping my mind around it.
Yeah. Yeah, no. It definitely is a little mind around
A
it.
little mind.
I mean, I was outraged more by the Russian, because you had huge amounts of Russian oil floating at sea.
Right.
Russia was actually, I mean, they were really facing before this war potential economic hardship within and definitely their ability to continue financing the war long term, because they were realizing the regular price was around 60, but in a lot of cases Russian oil was only getting $25 a barrel because the market was so oversupplied. Now it seems like the most brilliant hedge ever. You had all this oil that you're going to get any money for, and now you're able to sell it sanction free for $100 a barrel. So it's a gigantic windfall for Russia, who's the clear winner, the hands down winner of this war period.
Yeah, I agree. I think this surprises me less because Trump doesn't have the strong feelings that certainly like a Biden did about Ukraine must win this war. Right?
Certainly not. One could argue the opposite, but
right. Exactly. To the extent that he cares, I don't think he cares very much about the Ukraine-Russia war, especially since he couldn't bring it to a close.
Yeah.
I think he'd rather like to forget that it exists.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, I don't know if you saw this morning, Europe's pretty pissed about this. So they're all, because we have this arrangement with Europe on Europe supplying Ukraine weapons, but essentially we're selling them to the EU, to NATO. And so these EU countries have paid for all these weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd expect them to be like delivered. But instead of being delivered, they're now being shipped to the Middle East, to the Gulf states. So we're basically like bilking. We're taking a long-term loan. I don't know how it would be framed. But yeah, I've seen there is definitely a lot of commentary from European leaders that just another sign that you can't trust the U.S. or this administration, even on simple transactional deals, because they don't make delivery on what was promised.
Yeah, that's problematic. Yeah. Again, not surprising to me in any form. And I think it goes to the lack of extra capacity in our industrial base. We simply cannot fulfill orders if we're also trying to use those in a conflict, those same goods in a conflict. And the need, we'll talk a little bit to what extent, but knowing that Iran is also going after the Gulf states' infrastructure to some extent, needing assets, all the assets you can get in the Middle East, both from sort of protecting those assets, to which are going to affect oil markets, to actually waging the war. So we simply don't have capacity for multiple engagements.
Right. Yeah, certainly not.
And as far as I can tell, there's no urgency to build that capacity in, because conflicts are considered so short term that there's not necessarily seen to be a need to ramp up, like really improve our industrial base. Now, Hegseth, I think, does want to see that happen, but there are a lot of structural elements, including procurement and businesses. How lucrative is it for them to deal with the Pentagon? And there's just a lot of issues with getting an industrial base to have excess capacity. I mean, you have to pay for it. And I mean, maybe the U.S. is increasingly willing to pay for it, possibly with these bigger military budgets. But it's a huge problem going forward, because it also deteriorates our ability to take on future conflicts.
Yeah, for sure. And you have to think that, I mean, China's taking these lessons into account. I think the other things from the Chinese perspective is there's been a lot of attention paid to the 2 aircraft carriers that are in the region. I don't know how much you've read about this, but one of them, the Gerald Ford, actually has had to go back to Crete for repairs and is essentially out of commission. Not a lot on this has been transparent, but supposedly it's related to a fire within the housing, within the bunks, as well as like issues with the toilet treatment system. But effectively, the Gerald Ford is the newest, most powerful aircraft carrier on there.
I was going to say, I haven't read the story. I was going to say, well, a lot of these ships are
this is the newest, most expensive one. And it's effectively out of commission. So the other one, the Abraham Lincoln, I think a lot's been placed that it started the conflict only like 250 kilometers away from Iran, so effectively in the Persian Gulf, but it had to move away. And again, there's not a lot of transparency. Obviously, DoD is not going to be transparent around these things. There's a lot of the fog of war things, but it had to move 1,100 kilometers away. A lot of people online are interpreting this as Iran, because everybody's speculating, has Iran been able to attack the U.S. Navy through drones or through other means, which again, this is what we saw Ukraine do effectively to Russia, like in the Black Sea. Is there some sort of cover-up or lack of transparency around Iranian effectiveness in attack targeting U.S. vessels? Why are the aircraft, why is the Abraham Lincoln so far away from the theater of battle? How will any of this work to open up if we're going to escort vessels through the Straits of Hormuz if the carrier... people are reading into this like, oh, maybe Iran's a lot more effective, again, through these cheap technologies that are surprisingly effective in neutralizing what has been probably the U.S.'s biggest advantage in projecting power is the carrier battle groups, moving those into a region and then being able to have hundreds of aircraft deployed. Whether
Iran is successful or not, I think there's a lot of conventional wisdom in the military that aircraft carriers are going to be less useful in a war with China because they definitely have the missiles and capacity to take out aircraft carriers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was all. I mean, everything around Taiwan is like, how far U.S. assets would have to be positioned away from the theater. But that was based more on missile threats. This is just from drones, presumably, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they have some anti-ship, but that's been speculated. There's no confirmations that Iran have launched anti-ship missiles.
Right. I think it's just the case that China won't need drones to wreak this havoc.
Yeah.
I mean, they have drones too.
Yeah.
They have plenty of drones.
Yeah.
Obviously, because most commercial off-the-shelf drones are Chinese. So it's not like they lack the drones to go after them, but it's probably more efficient for them just to use these missiles that they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a war against China would be so different because it wouldn't be asymmetrical. It would be two major powers against each other, which you can see how difficult it is to fight an asymmetrical war. You definitely do not want to see a war between two nearly equal, if not equal, countries in terms of military power.
Well, yeah, in terms of the destruction capacity. But, I mean, that's what these militaries, both are designed to fight. They're not very well designed to fight asymmetric warfare. We're certainly not.
But if you have a country that can stand up to you toe-to-toe...
Yeah, well, you're talking more like a World War II, where it is truly two nation states. Yeah, the destructive power and the deaths and casualties, orders of magnitude to anything since World War II. And
just the complexity of...
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about what strategy the U.S. has. The complexity of actually executing strategy once a war begins. Of course, right now, some of the question is, was there a strategy before this war began? And is there a strategy now? But
yeah. So I think wrapping up the economic impact, I mean, the other thing I wanted to point to, just because This is without a doubt the linchpin probably to Iranian strategy is also the impact on global stock markets, because that is definitely a point for Trump and for Trump's closest supporters. So global stock markets, with the exception of Israel, which is interesting, are now in correction territory. So they're off 10% since February 28th. Again, much of that impact has been... It's been fairly even, actually, across markets. I would say it's impacted European and Asian markets a little bit more than the U.S., but the S&P 500 is very close to being down 10%. The other thing that's happened is that inflationary pressure has definitely hit, because, again, people are recognizing, once again, oil inputs into almost every aspect of modern life. So most analysts are now expecting U.S. inflation to top 4% this year, when it was trending closer to like 2.5% to 2%.
Right.
Yields on the 10-year and 20-year treasuries have increased significantly over the last 3 months, or over the last 3 weeks, which have made borrowing cost for all sectors, including things like mortgages. So U.S. consumers are definitely feeling it. I mentioned energy prices weren't that impacted, but definitely at the pump has moved up. The U.S. is now averaging about $4 per gallon for gasoline compared to where it was at before, which is in the twos. Trump was bragging at the State of the Union about being like $1.80 somewhere in Texas or something. So it's considerably above that currently, which has definitely not helped the general support or his approval ratings during this whole conflict. So yeah, global economy is under a lot of pressure. It could be much, much worse. And it may end up being much worse depending on where the conflict goes from here. But for now, like I said, the U.S. administration has pulled every single lever that it can in order to try to ease the impact on energy prices and thus inflation. But it's beginning to break down. I think we saw that within global stock markets last week, where the tacoing was not getting traction anymore. Mm-hmm. That it was just seen as bluster that Trump was putting out there.
Right. So what do you mean that it could get worse depending on where the war is headed?
I think the longer it goes on and the longer the Straits of Hormuz are cut off, the greater impact it has. Because obviously you only have so much strategic reserves you can release. There's only so much seaborne vessels that were out there. So then you run up against hard physical shortfalls of oil, particularly in Asia, because that's where most of the Middle East oil went. So you create bidding. Asia is going to bid up the price of oil as they get increasingly desperate. There could be wider financial implications too within these Asian countries, which run significant debts. They often, for regime stability, particularly in Southeast Asia, offer significant fuel subsidies to the population. And as that becomes less and less affordable, it begins to trigger issues with creditors and credit ratings. And then you could have like a full-blown financial crisis within some of these countries. But yeah, as it goes on, that physical gap between global demand for oil and the supply begins to really catch up, because it's just not being... I mean, they've shut down wells in huge amounts in Iraq, huge amounts in Kuwait, a fairly significant amount in Saudi Arabia. So that represents this real physical loss of oil to the market. So you're going to begin to see real demand destruction coming up.
Okay, that answers my question.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about U.S. strategy. And there was this article that came out in Foreign Affairs recently with Columbian professor Leo Schifrin and Columbia professor Stephen Biddle. And they define strategy as simply a plan by which military power will produce the desired political results. I'm not sure how that holds up to generally what military studies consider strategy, because I've never taken or taught one of those classes. But I think it's a useful definition to talk about in a practical matter, U.S. strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's always important to remember that war and military campaigns is just an extension of politics.
always very important to remember, right? So I think war is politics by other means, or
yeah.
that's how the
Yeah.
quote goes.
Yeah.
So what are the goals if you want, what are your desired political results? And they argue that the purpose of initiating the war seemed to be to eliminate the violent threat to U.S. interests posed by the Islamic Republic. I mean, this can mean a lot of things. So they argue that the maximum outcome would be to solve this problem more or less by completely regime change. And I think it's important to have a sense of what it's not just regime change, it's a particular type of regime they want to replace it. We keep saying regime change. There can be regime change, and it's a more hardline government toward the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah. And clearly, I mean, the U.S. or Israel certainly didn't come in here with any sort of like pro-democracy sort of vision. I think the vision, and this has been confirmed with everything that I've heard, is they wanted to do a Venezuela. Trump wanted to go in, didn't care whether it was like the same regime. I think there was, and I mentioned this last time, there was this strong emphasis they did not like the theocrats. But I think the idea was, if they could get an IRGC dude that was reasonable and would be more pro-U.S. Israel, that's what they wanted.
Yeah,
he could be brutal to the people internally. They'd care less about that. But if he was willing to deal, then that was success.
So they want a regime change is regime that
favorable to U.S. and Israeli interest.
Right.
Yeah.
So that has to be clarified. The minimum objective was to cripple Iran for a while and periodically revive the war to tamp down whatever threats generated. So this fallback option of intermittently renewing war is known as mowing the lawn. This is new to me. I've never heard of this concept.
No, but it has been getting traction, the idea of mowing the lawn, that you have to periodically go back and bomb them in order to essentially, that's, I guess, if they were able to end the war now, you could say this is the first lawn mowing that was needed, because the initial lawn mowing.
What about the 12-day war?
Yeah, that was when the weeds are totally out of control. You needed to mow that lawn initially and obliterate, because we obliterated their nuclear program. But now, boom, it's grown back up. So we had to go mow the lawn.
But that was like less than a year. And this time
it's a fast-growing lawn. I don't know.
I mean, how often, if you were taking the strategy, I don't think this is a real strategy necessarily, like, we planned, because I think that this would have been a much shorter operation if we were just going to say, we'll have we'll bomb them every once in a while to make sure their capacity is staying crippled.
Yeah, that's certainly not, it would be a reframing of the operation. If we were able to end it like within the next couple of weeks, it would be this pivot to, we've deteriorated successfully, both the nuclear program and the ballistic missile and drone factories, and if we have to go back again, we'll do that. But mission accomplished.
Yeah, but they could have said that 2 weeks ago.
Right, because that's not what they originally they were like, this regime is so weak and pathetic and signaled such weakness based on the size of the protest that occurred in January. We think we can just like push a little bit and they're going to topple over.
Right.
That was devastatingly wrong.
Right. Yeah, so I guess that would mean a shift in strategy, because if you'd wanted to pursue that strategy from the beginning, I think you would have something more similar to the 12-day war. You just keep repeating that.
Yeah, it would have much fewer objectives and extent. Yeah.
So they write that the Iranian threat, whether real or exaggerated, has been reduced. Those 15,000 strikes, right, is definitely reduced, but it's not eliminated. And we talked about the asymmetrical warfare, right, that Iran is able to. So obviously their drones and missiles is reduced by 90%, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to strike targets, because they are still striking targets. And the problem is that it's fueling its incentives to actually use its weaker but dangerous forces for retaliation and revenge. So strategy, if you're talking about we want to deteriorate their capabilities, that's one thing, but without regime change to a more favorable government, you're just making the regime more intent to use what it has left to damage your interests.
Yeah. 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 So I think it's made it more hardline. And I think the most devastating thing is Iran like always threatened around the Straits of Hormuz and attacking like Gulf energy infrastructure. But now that they've demonstrated it and demonstrated that you can't really 100% defend against it, that you have like this permanent threat premium on energy coming out of the region now, which is like a permanent damage on the global economy.
Right. I mean, I think,
and the cost of that is trillions of dollars compared to where we were before the war.
Exactly. So I think if you can't get a willing partner in Iran to negotiate with you, the problem is you can call an end to this, but that's not going to necessarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz and creates all kinds of just structural problems for the global economy.
Yeah, so Iran is talking about implementing a toll system so that they're charging like $2 million per tanker, which I didn't bother like, well, what percentage does that like add to? Probably don't add that much, but still it's a huge blow on U.S. reputation. I mean, half of the purpose of the U.S. Navy and its force within the world is like the insurance of free trade and protected trade routes throughout the world. So now you have a toll system that's being implemented by this regime that demonstrates it can, and the U.S. can't stop it. So you have like that loss, and then it's just the fact that even if you make this agreement, the world knows, traders know that Iran at any moment can send out its drones and make a credible strike on these tankers, which again, these things are the size of like skyscrapers,
right?
Laid out. I mean, these are the biggest vessels that humans have ever made.
Right.
These are gigantic vessels, so enormously hard to protect against something like a drone. But filled with, and it's not that they would sink, but it's just, just the insurers don't want to deal with that. So you've had like this permanent premium on it, which right there just really questions the worth of doing this. That you degraded Iran, but did you degrade them that much more than what they were after the 12-day war? And clearly they were targeting regime, because half of the strikes are targeting the leadership. Right. We certainly wouldn't have done the leadership if this was mowing the lawn.
Right.
We're not at the level of like the supreme leader that Israel did.
Toll system in the Strait of Hormuz is that's the number one reason Trump hasn't tacoed out.
Yeah, because he can't fix that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, was like, so you're would taco.
You were all like, well, said stuff, which is ridiculous. But I think because of what they've effectively done in the Strait of Hormuz, I think that's why he has been unable just to like, okay, we met our objective. This war is over.
He would for sure. And I think the other thing is, I think both the Saudis and the UAE are encouraging the U.S. to continue this war until the regime's broken, because they know this is a horrible for them, this outcome.
Right.
Especially for like the UAE, build itself up as like, this luxury place trying to pivot away from energy, but their whole economy is still dependent on it. If your place can never be seen as safe,
right,
and you can always be manipulated by a more aggressive Iranian regime, this is a horrible deal for you. A lot of people are starting to think, what is this security arrangement that the Gulf states have agreed upon? They've just made themselves targets, and the U.S. hasn't effectively defended them or their economies from the.
So that's a point that Narges Baghali makes in this other article that she makes in Foreign Affairs, that One of the wins for Iran in this war is this putting some separation between the United States and its Gulf allies. And not that they're going to break away from the U.S., but, the U.S. not defending them and not seeming to do anything about its security arrangements, that this creates some distance between them.
Yeah. I think definitely long term when they look at it. I mean, I think in the short term, I think as we mentioned before, the calls by like the UAE and Saudi Arabia to actually continue this, because the current arrangement isn't sustainable for them economically, because with the Straits of Hormuz shut down, you have quite a few of these countries that have shut in almost the entirety. I'm thinking of like Kuwait in particular, but also the UAE and Saudi Arabia, where this situation where Iran has de facto control over the Straits of Hormuz or some sort of toll campaign, that's not something that they're desired. So for like the short term, it seems to put them more in the U.S. camp, but then the long term, they have to think, hey, is this arrangement actually working out for us?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's kind of interesting is, this conflict, you've made this comment, shows that the Chinese has no influence in the region, but this might give them an opening to some extent because it wants to have security guarantees with these countries. I mean, it's mostly focused on economics, but it has had talks about security arrangements. So at least that kind of opens the door a little bit for them.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see long-term kind of what their position were, if there is a void left by the U.S. in that situation.
I think the other thing that she points out is Iran's preparation for economic warfare. And certainly the things that they've learned from the 12-Day War, but also from their war with Iraq, is that the way that they're never going to be as militarily strong as the U.S. and Israel, right? That's obviously apparent. But just the thought of aggression, they've been planning to use an economic war, which they've been very effective at. In some sense, they face so many sanctions from the U.S. that it gives the U.S. less leverage economically. But by closing the Strait of Hormuz and tactics like that, they have affected the economy in a way that, just the price of oil leading to gasoline prices is certainly something that bothers Trump very much.
Yeah. And I think that really raises a question. I think that's a good pivot point to kind of, what's going to happen in the coming weeks. And so the Washington Post just reported yesterday in an exclusive that it looks like, very much that the Pentagon is preparing for up to 2 months of a ground war. So that's one piece of evidence. The second was Trump.
I take back my bet.
What's that?
I take back my bet.
You take back your bet. The second piece of evidence was Trump truthed on Truth Social, whatever that's called, that to watch Mark Levine. Now, Mark Levine, I don't know if you're familiar or listeners are familiar, long-term right-wing radio host who now has his own show. I don't know on what, probably on Fox. So on his show, he makes a hour-long case of why it's necessary for the U.S. to invade Iran in order to seize the highly enriched uranium. So it's almost like Trump, instead of doing this himself as the commander-in-chief and talking to the country, has kind of spawned this off to, or handed this off to Mark Levine, who is there to make the case for why we need to send ground troops. I think between those two pieces of evidence, it seems very likely that, assuming that the negotiations don't go well, which are currently these informal negotiations that are being via the intermediary of Pakistan, if those do not go well and Iran does not agree to the 15 points that have been kind of laid out by the Trump administration, it seems like a very high likelihood that the 17,000 ground troops and special forces will be deployed over the next month or so for, according to the Washington Post report, a pretty extended campaign.
Yeah, 2 months would definitely be extended because it would probably last more than 2 months. Whatever you're planning for, you should also just know it lasts longer. I think the one piece of counter evidence, and this is just Trump always sending these mixed messages, is that of all people, they're sending JD Vance to negotiate. And obviously, he said, the war will end soon, and we know that he wants a war to end. And personally, I wonder if Trump could just get the Strait of Hormuz open again, if that would be enough for him.
Yeah, but that's a big question. And how do you do that without taking control, essentially, of both Karg Island and the nearshore part of Iran, where you can launch like drone strikes?
You negotiate with Iran?
Yeah, they don't seem willing to negotiate. And I would say, I don't know if that's really a sign. I mean, isn't that caving in? I mean, Iran wanted JD Vance because they view him as the most, I mean, he's been nearly silent on this entire campaign. Yeah. And it's been reported that, internally he's expressed deep reservations representing, again, he's trying to position himself for 2028. He knows that there is probably at least maybe a quarter of MAGA that is hardcore isolationist, that are strongly against this. This is the Tucker Carlson. This is the Candace Owens. This is that part of the MAGA movement that seems very close to breaking away. The Marjorie Taylor Greens, that whole group. So I don't know if I would read too much into like JD Vance being, a pacifist sign, as much as this is the one thing we can give to appease. And I don't even know, maybe he's even throwing JD Vance under the bus because he didn't want to own this. And now that you get him deeply involved in the process, he has to own it. As retribution, who knows? I mean, who knows what's going on internally? The CPAC was held like last week, pretty low attendance.
Out of 10 for the first time in 10 years.
Yeah, very low energy. But Vance did finish at the top of the straw poll, but Rubio has been surging. Rubio's another one who's kind of
a little surprising at CPAC, right? I mean, in the Republican Party in general, was not surprised to see like 35%, but at CPAC, which is the most conservative element.
Yeah, it is fully magnified. Yeah.
Yeah, you would think that they still would not want Rubio. But also some of the tension, because I think if you're for Rubio, you're kind of for the war, aren't you?
Yeah, but even here, I mean, I think Rubio's been more skilled with it in his framing, but he hasn't been like, the only one that's been truly out there is Hegseth, and he's also being positioned, if this does go poorly, it's very likely he'll be thrown under the bus. I mean, Trump made the comment during one of the briefings this past week where it was like, Hegseth really wants to go, I'm for negotiating, and I know Hegseth is going to be disappointed if this wraps up too early. And it was Hegseth's idea, around doing these. Yeah. I mean, it was a very much like positioning him for, if this goes south, I have a dude I can throw under the bus.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That seems very Trumpian. I mean, maybe we should just consider like the ramifications of sending in ground troops.
Yeah, and I think based on this evidence, based on the fact Trump himself is pointing people towards Levin, it seems like the mission maybe isn't going to be so much Karg Island, which I think one of the things I wanted to frame was that it would not be very effective as economic leverage on Iran, because Iran's already, the regime's been under 47 years of sanctions of various forms. But over the last 20 years, pretty extreme sanctions to the point where they've gone periods of 5-10 years where their exports to the oil markets are very little. Mm-hmm. So shutting off their oil revenue isn't really much of a threat to a regime that sees this as existential threat and is very used to surviving under horrible economic conditions. I don't think it's any leverage at all. So then that puts it at the much more difficult. I mean, Karg Island is hard to defend, probably easy to take, but hard to defend, but not much leverage, versus going in hundreds of miles into the interior, potentially multiple locations, having to secure pretty wide perimeter around heavily defended installations, and then having to extract probably from rubble the highly enriched uranium at these nuclear sites that have now been hit 3 or 4 times, over the past 6 months since the 12-day war.
Yeah, it seems like you need more than 17,000 troops.
It just seems like, you're deploying the full 82nd Airborne. It feels like you need specialists like engineering corps, which isn't really, I'm sure they're capable. But yeah, it does seem like a very high number of troops to secure the perimeter. Obviously you have complete air superiority, but you're going to be harassed constantly by drones.
And we talked about the sort of insurgency planning as well.
Yes, I mean, we know the IRGC is already split into the kind of the 31 different subdivisions, each armed. So, and at least what they're, in their bravado of their online propaganda, they're kind of spoiling for a fight on the ground. So I don't know. Yeah, it seems very difficult. I have not watched Mark Levine and how he frames the difficulty potentially of this task, because you have to assume maybe half of it is buried underground. But you have to assume they got out a significant amount of enriched uranium. How much do you need for a dirty bomb? And the addition are probably not that huge a quantity. And that's the big concern, is just them making a single dirty bomb. I don't know if that buys them a lot of security, but maybe a regime that really has nothing left to lose would be willing to take out Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Knowing that they would then in turn, honestly, I don't think we know Israel wouldn't hold back, and that they would likely be a nuclear holocaust in Iran, which is a disaster. Obviously, then a complete disaster for the world.
Yeah, that's really terrifying. I just think that, I think this sounds like a horrible idea. I mean, the war against Iran sounded bad, but ground troops sounds horrible. And I don't see how we we always think, okay, we'll be in and out, but that's rarely ever true.
This is not this operation for sure.
And so it sounds like something that would be easy to get bogged down in some sort of quagmire, which is, if anything, you would think Trump would be very nervous about doing that. And I think it's kind of a shame that the recent military adventurism, such as in Venezuela, gave him so much confidence to let somebody like Hegseth persuade him to engage in this. And then if he's being persuaded to put troops on the ground for something like getting the enriched uranium, like you said, a very complicated operation. I mean, to me, it's just surprising and really not in keeping with what I would have at all expected from Trump.
Yeah, and that's what's led to the split within the MAGA movement. I mean, the core of his movement versus the establishment Republicans that existed before under Bush is this isolationist, no more forever wars, no more wars in the Middle East. So it's a very core component, I think, together with immigration. Those are the two core components of Trumpism. And he's betrayed, that central one. And people are actually getting mad because he's backed off on the mass deportations. So there's it feels like the two core components of Trumpism are being attacked. That's why, there's a lot of speculation on is this the final end of the MAGA movement? And I think, putting ground troops, and then if it goes south, we may be seeing it crumble.
I think even 2 months of ground troops is definitely a challenge to the MAGA isolationist side, even though I think they're also very, very reluctant to completely break with Trump. So I think it will take something pretty extreme. If it's more than 2 months, I think it would have to take, I think 2 months would strain it. But if it's something that lasts, if you see heavy casualties or something that lasts, for 6 months, I think that's going to be pretty devastating to the movement.
Oh, well, for sure. At 6 months, the global economy is wrecked.
That's true.
Global economy is absolutely wrecked. We do not have a long runway at all. And, I think everything that's built into the markets currently, assumes a pretty quick resolution where stuff, obviously it's going to take months for the damage done already to work through the system. That's built in, but it's assuming stuff gets flowing again within the next couple of weeks. And if it
Yeah,
goes
which
beyond that, then
without it,
things could get bad.
well, I think a 2 month ground operation definitely means that if it's like something like you said for uranium enrichment, getting that out of the country, then I think, yeah, it's going to hit the economy.
Yeah. Yeah. So it could be very rough times ahead potentially.
But what also the Republicans are going to struggle with is how much independence. So the MAGA will be very reluctant to actually break from Trump, even the ones who feel betrayed. But the independents especially feel very betrayed. I mean, Joe Rogan has been very, very vocal about
Yeah,
about
there's a
this.
lot. Yeah, he has lost the bro vote largely. He had already, I mean, polls for months have been showing the swing from Latino males, from black males have all kind of swung back to how they were prior to the 2024 election. Yeah, I mean, everything is building up to a complete blue tsunami in November in regards to midterms. We'll see whether or not the Senate swings, but everything's in play currently.
Yeah. I fully expect the blue tsunami wave thing to happen midterms, but what will be interesting is to see if they can keep that momentum going into the next presidential election.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on kind of who they put up as a candidate, but I think the anger will be there. And again, it all depends. How does this go? What are the economic implications? How long do those implications last? It's a long time till 2028.
Right. I mean, but yeah, it's going to be I will be shocked if it's not pretty disastrous for Republicans in the midterms.
Yeah.
All signs point to that. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
as long, if there are more casualties, which you would definitely probably see with a ground invasion, I mean, all these things will just deepen the problems for Republicans.
Yeah, so we'll see. Again, every time that he's positioned forces in the vicinity of an area, he's used them. And just everything kind of coming out between these two pieces of evidence, it seems to be pointing more and more. I have not looked at kind of where the poly market is currently at in regards to U.S. forces. Pulling that up now. So I think yesterday it was at 56%. Is now up to 66%. So definitely these two pieces of evidence have moved the markets where people think it's more likely.
Well, it's moved my mind too.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to bet against ground troops, but the more and more you keep reading about it, the more it sounds likely. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around it. I mean, nothing seems more antithetical to Trump than actually sending in ground troops to a war in the Middle East.
Well, I'm sure it's being framed a certain way.
Yeah, I know, but
and obviously we don't have, nobody publicly has the full picture of what the situation is on the ground, but definitely, I mean, every expert, every analysis that I've read is that this will be extraordinarily difficult, and the chance of success as defined by some of the articles that we read of truly eliminating like the nuclear capacity of Iran or its ability to threaten the Straits of Hormuz seems pretty low that you're going to get this from the 17,000 troops in the region, which is not much.
It's really not for that type of invasion. So I'm having trouble fathoming how they would think that they're going to execute that particular strategy. It's for Karg Island, 17,000. Yeah, I see that. But I don't see how you even think about going for the uranium with just 17,000.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that special forces, but yeah, it's the extraction part. It's the main sites where I think the majority of people think is a good volume of the highly enriched uranium. But yeah, the extraction process alone, I mean, this is a couple of weeks just to get on the ground, defend the perimeter, and then extract it.
Yeah.
And then get it out of the country. I mean, you definitely have to have full air superiority because you're pretty vulnerable that couple 100 miles flying in.
It's not easy to transport enriched uranium either.
Yeah, no.
You can't just put it in a box.
No. Yeah. Yeah. This is a specialized operation for sure. Yeah.
Well, it sounds really, really disturbing to me. I don't think there is a win at all without getting a favorable government, and I don't know if there's a way to accomplish that.
Yeah, not with our footprint currently, and not with what's known on the ground. Especially, I mean, when we talked about before, kind of which was dropped, I think, within a couple of days, the idea of the Kurds, using the northern Iraqi Kurds as kind of like a proxy ground force, or some of the other minority groups within Iran. But that must have been a non-starter. Either they were like not biting on that at all because of...
Probably smart of them.
Probably smart of them. But yeah, without having... certainly around regime change, unless... Yeah, again, you needed to have done the human level intelligence and groundwork and arrangements with the more moderate components of the IRGC to have those generals, those divisions break off, that you could fracture it, and then really, have a decent proxy force combined with the air support that U.S. and Israel can bring. And yeah, you do have a really good chance of at least putting a moderate U.S.-friendly IRGC member at the head of the government. But without that, I mean, I don't see it happening.
I think if it hasn't happened by now, it's not going to happen.
It doesn't seem that way. The other things I've read is, I guess there have been some good reports coming out on just the nature of the intelligence, because we've talked a lot about that between Mossad and the CIA. And I think it's not so much human intelligence. This is just that they've penetrated every electronic, think about every camera, every traffic light, everything that has been so thoroughly penetrated by Israel that they're able to monitor movements of people electronically. So this isn't about, they're masters at kind of the old spycraft of building up human relations and having kind of this cloak and dagger thing. It's the modern superiority of digital tactical
information. Maybe they needed the more old-fashioned.
That's what I just assumed. It was kind of a combination that you had people that were just turncoats, that the regime was so unpopular that you had kind of that. I'm sure there's that going on, but everything I've read also implies the success has been really driven by they penetrated every electronic device that can monitor
knowing where people are. So you can take out people that way, but you can't necessarily build the relationship.
You're not going to build a coalition to actually overthrow the regime,
which is what they needed to have success in this. So, well, as always, we're leaving on a positive note.
Fun times.
Always. Well, let's hope there's a better outcome than what we have predicted. But it seems for right now, things look pretty cloudy.
Yeah, I would think, next month or so, buckle up.
Yeah.
Buckle up.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode of Kellogg's Global Politics. You can visit our website at www.kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com and follow us on X at Global Kellogg or me, AR Kellogg.
You can also reach us by email, so Anita at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com, myself, Ryan, at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com. As always, please see the show notes for the articles we discussed in this episode.
Thanks.
Bye.